Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Dole Institute of Politics. My name is Jonathan Earle. I'm a professor in the History Department and interim director at the Dole Institute. There are two things that you should have received when you walked through the door. The first is a brochure from the Friends of the Dole Institute. If you like the programming we do here or the building you're in, we're still working on our endowment to keep it going. The chancellor's here, so I think he'd be delighted if he didn't have to keep underwriting me. So any level of giving is appreciated. That's the Friends of the Dole brochure. The other one is your program here, and on the back we have listed a few of our remaining programs for this fall semester. Thursday, November 29th, that's the week after Thanksgiving, we will be presenting an evening with Governor Michael Dukakis. He'll come and talk about what he's doing now, about the 1988 presidential race and his life in public service. We have one more white glove tour of our Dole archive downstairs on November 17th, and there are still 3 more meetings of Dole Institute fellow Jerry Austin's Presidential Politics from the Inside study group as we get closer and closer to those first votes being cast in Iowa and New Hampshire and Nevada and South Carolina. It's getting a lot more riveting and exciting, and you'll get a good insider's perspective. That meets Tuesdays at 4 o'clock here at the Institute. To introduce tonight's guest, we have Ambassador David Lambertson, who is also head of the University of Kansas and Fort Leavenworth program. David.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'd like to start by just saying a very few words about the KU Fort Leavenworth program. This is a new program, but it's something that builds upon cooperative activities that have taken place between KU and Fort Leavenworth for many years. It is something that reflects the conviction of the Chancellor and a number of others of us that in this post-9/11 world, universities have an obligation to try to help as and where they can in the national effort to cope with the new and very complicated challenges that we're facing around the world. So that's the underlying philosophy. It means we're going to be trying to increase academic exchanges of various kinds, graduate study, academic symposiums, perhaps research partnerships. There's a rich variety of possibilities out there, and we look forward to our new relationship. In that connection, I'd like to mention that there will be a symposium right here tomorrow, starting at roughly 9:30 in the Simons Media Room, which will pair military personnel with recent experience in Afghanistan and Iraq with academics in an effort to identify some lessons and some insights that might be useful for the future. Seating will be limited, but there is some available, I think, so I wanted to mention that to all of you. It is my honor tonight to introduce to you Lieutenant General William Caldwell IV. I might add that I had the pleasure of meeting Lieutenant General William Caldwell III this summer during the ceremonies surrounding General Caldwell's assumption of command at Fort Leavenworth. And in his speech that day, General Caldwell referred to his father as the real Bill. And I would also like to take note of the presence here this evening of General Caldwell's wife, Stephanie, who I might add is an ordained minister of the Methodist Church. Welcome to you. General Caldwell commands the Combined Arms Center at Fort Leavenworth, which includes the Command and General Staff College and a host of other schools and programs scattered throughout the country. He is also the Deputy Commander of the United States Army's Training and Doctrine Command. General Caldwell's career, including combat with the 82nd Airborne Division during Operation Desert Storm, and then later command of that division in Iraq, as well as service with the 25th Division and the 10th Mountain Division of Bob Dole's division, and his variety of very senior staff assignments is outlined in the program that you've been given this evening. You should note his academic credentials as well, and his service as a White House Fellow. all of which adds up to a very distinguished career with more to come. General Caldwell is an example of something that the United States Army does very well, which is to identify officers of outstanding leadership potential and then develop that potential through a ladder of assignments of increasing difficulty and responsibility. And now General Caldwell is really at the center of that system of Army leadership development. And he is in that position at a time when creative and innovative leadership, adaptive leadership, to use his term, is vital to our success as we deal with the new face of war in the 21st century. Please join me in welcoming to KU and to the Dole Institute Lieutenant General William Caldwell.
Thanks, David. I appreciate that. Coming here tonight it's a real honor to come to the Dole Institute of Politics, especially when you look at the type of caliber of people you bring in here to and have enriching discussions and follow-on Q&A afterwards. So I very much appreciate the opportunity to be here. But really what excited me the most about coming here was that I was trolling for tickets. So I just want to let anybody know, if you've got tickets to that, what is it, the Kansas-Mozu game that's going to take place in about 2 weeks, from what I've heard, that absolutely sold out early. When I had the opportunity tonight to talk to the Chancellor, I asked him, I said, so tell me exactly what is your major responsibility here at the Institute? He goes, I'm the #1 advisor to the football team. I said, anything about academics? He said, not now. So anyway, when you stop to think about it, there it was the other day on the TV screen scrolling across, it says 76 Kansas, I think it was 39 Nebraska. And I was sure basketball season had started. And then it became very apparent that it was, it's football season time here at Rock Jock Jayhawk time. And so to the Kansas team, that's just great. And when you look back, I guess last time they were 10-0 was in 1899. So I don't know what that says about the coach, but he sure broke a record here, about 118 years. Last time they've seen a winning season like this, but that's terrific. Listen, I do want to talk for just 1 second and tell you one or two things about what we do at Fort Leavenworth. A real quick slide here can kind of, is this thing on? Can you hear me? Yes, sir. Yeah. Just to tell you right here, that's for you all, this is a geography lesson. This is Kansas right here, right in the middle of the United States, and that's where we live. But the Combined Arms Center has a responsibility and oversight for all the training and education, basically, for the United States Army. And as such, all the centers and schools that go all the way from here in Fort Gordon, Georgia, all the way out here to the National Training Center at Fort Irwin, California, to our Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California, down to Fort Bliss, Texas, and across the United States, all come under our purview and responsibility. So it can just give you insight. Then we have oversight, obviously, over in Iraq and Afghanistan, where we've got teams of people that are collecting all the time of lessons learned so that we can bring it back and incorporate it into what we do, which is doctrinal development, lessons learned, academic development, as we continue educating and training the United States Army, both at the individual and collective level, both as they prepare for further educational development in their careers, and then collective training as they prepare, really today, for deployments into both Afghanistan and Iraq. So it's a very, very large responsibility. We've got just some incredibly talented people that work in this organization. And then the 17 schools and centers are mostly, almost all commanded by 2 stars who do great jobs out there running those for us. So a large institution, but that's kind of what I have oversight on behalf of you all, the American public, to take care of your Army that the Army has charged me with. If I could, let's go to the next slide. A little tough here not being able to see the slides, and I got to lean forward here. But I do want to talk about a couple of things. And I think as you look about what's happening today in warfare, it is changing, and there's no question. And we can look back over our history and do some great studies and analysis to see what people have done in the past. But I think these two quotes here capture probably best than anything else, that there is no constant, that there will always be change. And until you recognize that and understand that, then you're doomed to be challenged as the complexities of this battlefield today in the 21st century continue to evolve, us not being able to adapt and be prepared and ready to deal with them. The challenge of professional armies today has always been adapting to changes more quickly than their adversary. And there's a great quote that's been stated out there before about the fact that it's not a matter of if you're going to change, it's a matter about how rapidly you can adapt and change to what the environment, provides you out there. Throughout much of our Civil War, if you look back to that period, we look back and have a little discussion there. What we saw there was ranks of men, linear formations, using muskets, moving forward, firing 1 or 2 volleys as they all closed with into about 40 yards of each other, and warfare. And that's how it was. And then all of a sudden something changed on the battlefield, and the bullet became much more lethal. It became much more accurate and could go out to about 200 yards. And so as these linear formations continued to close, now instead of perhaps 1 or 2 volleys of fire, you now are having perhaps 4 to 6 volleys of fire. And so the deadliness of war became more intense, and the casualties rose dramatically. For the simple fact, if you could throw up the next slide there, as you look at it, and you see here, this is the end of the Civil War, and it looks very much exactly like it does in World War I. You saw what eventually evolved from linear formations of troops closing with as close as they could and then going into hand-to-hand and bayonet to one of trench warfare at the end of the Civil War. Well, that's what we then carried into World War I with as we moved into that period of warfare. And again, World War I, very bloody, deadly battlefields out there as we continued learning from the lessons of the past and applying them to the future. And then somebody came up with a new innovative way of fighting called the machine gun. And it changed the whole dynamics, and we developed just literally grounds between trench lines that were not usable anymore, and casualties of immense proportions that took place as people, again, started trying to figure out how do you adapt and change your tactics and your techniques and your strategy to this new evolutionary period that's occurring there in warfare. And then eventually what we saw after the war was the formation of tank units and the evolution of airplanes, which could then fly over these no-man lands, and tanks that could roll through these no-man lands. But we continue to see that kind of adaptation and modification as the warfare continues throughout the years. Well, what I'd like to talk to you about today is some of the ways that we see the warfare changing and what we're doing about it here in the United States Army today. There are several key changes that are in fact occurring. And what we're seeing is a change in both the battle space of where the warfare is taking place, and a change in the nature and the characteristic of the enemy that we're having to confront. The first major change is in the use and dissemination of information. We truly are in the information age, and information that can travel literally at the speed of light. The explosion of the internet has caused a revolution, not an evolution, but absolutely a revolution in how we look at the information domain. It allows anyone to have immediate access to audiences around the world, while millions of people can read and see what you have posted, both in an attribution and non-attributional form. The media is everywhere too, and technology allows them to almost instantly broadcast events across the globe. The competition nature of the news cycle, the 24 hours news cycles that are occurring, creates situations where news agencies constantly search for the spectacular, eye-grabbing, or breaking story that's out there. And when an incident occurs, it does get immediate media attention. And reporting in many cases is speculation about the details. And then viewers have to start drawing their own conclusions of what did or did not occur, because we're not always very rapid in responding to and helping put in perspective as to what they're seeing or what really did actually happen. The use and dissemination of information is one of the key factors contributing to the second key change, and that's the way our enemies operate, the adversary out there. The enemy we face today has expanded significantly. The threats from nation states still do exist. However, threats from terrorist or radical organizations that don't wear uniforms or clearly identify themselves have vastly increased. We call them non-state actors. They include, but not necessarily limited to, rebel opposition groups, local militia, warlords, as well as vigilante and civil defense groups. When they are clearly operating without state control, we again refer to them as non-state actors. But we must be prepared to deal with them, as we have to be still prepared to deal with state actors. One of the biggest challenges in dealing with non-state actors is that their organizational structures are decentralized and dispersed around the globe. They're not localized and found in one particular area where you can go conduct military operations, but in fact gain their strength through their decentralization and their spread throughout the globe. I recently read a book called The Starfish and the Spider, and I had a gentleman that had recommended it to me, and he said, pick it up and read it, Bill, it's just come out. And what struck me the most about this is the way that insurgent elements, these non-state actors, are very much like starfish, and that we in the military have always thought of our adversary as a spider. A spider is such that you can cut off the head and the spider dies. You have eliminated that threat. But with a starfish, when you cut off one of its tentacles, not only does it regrow that tentacle, but the tentacle you cut off can in fact grow into a starfish, and now you've created two. And very rapidly you can create many more like that. And that's the nature of the insurgency in which we're having to confront and deal with, one that is very decentralized and spread globally throughout this world. The dispersion around the globe is another contributing factor to the difficult challenges that we do face. They can find safe harbor in nations around the world. They interdisperse themselves with innocent civilians, making it more difficult for us than when in fact we do locate and find them to deal with that particular adversary. This makes it very hard for us. They're very much, and I'd use the analogy perhaps like a cancer. You know, if you talk to a doctor, the doctor will identify a cancerous element within a human being, and as they go in and conduct a surgery to remove that cancer, they have to be very careful about not hurting or damaging any of the organs around it. And then at the same time, they realize if they don't get the full cancerous cells, that something there can be left behind, continue to grow, and be just as much a threat again in the future. And this is the nature of the enemy that we're confronted with today. One that will hide amongst the innocent civilians, making it difficult for us to find, locate, and deal with. And secondly, such that when we do find them and eliminate a particular threat, they still have the resiliency because of their decentralization and globalization to continue to be a very formidable threat. Our enemies are also masters at exploiting the media and the information, and they do it very much to their advantage. They utilize the latest technology to include the internet and blog sites. This technology allows them to literally reach millions of people in real time. They know and exploit the information domain. They play off the 24-hour news cycles. They understand the sensationalism of what they do can in fact perhaps grab and garner media attention. Sometimes we find that when we strike at an enemy and take out a particular target, that they will then get on the internet or other medium forums and exaggerate what happened, play it up, and in some cases even falsely portray deaths that did occur. And unfortunately, over the last 13 months as I was in Iraq and had to deal with some of these very incidents, there were times when we conducted military strikes against a particular target. It was very clear and evident that that was a Al-Qaeda hideout. The military strike was conducted, and what we found was in a couple of situations that if we didn't then go in right afterwards with military forces on the ground after conducting an airstrike, that in fact there were points in times when the insurgent elements would remove all the weaponry from that particular location and then invite the press in and say perhaps that the U.S. forces, the coalition forces, have struck an innocent target, when in fact that wasn't the case at all, and clearly we had multiple means of establishing that before the target was struck. But again, their ability to play off and use that information domain to their advantage is one that we have to be very much aware of, and it has in fact changed the nature of warfare here in the 21st century. It's because of these two features, our emergence into the information age and the nature of the enemy themselves, especially the dispersion and their decentralizations, that they have chosen to choose a strategy of exhaustion. Strategies of exhaustion have existed for centuries, and there's critical differences between what it used to be and perhaps what we see them using it today. Typically, in the past, the target of exhaustion was one that they would go after supply lines or something that was critical to the different armies in order to support and supply their forces with the ability to carry on and sustain combat operations. Today, however, that's changed. If you look back at the Civil War, that was a great example of that. The Confederacy was considerably outmatched in their ability to develop and produce heavy weapons. Nearly all the U.S. industry was located in the Union. Therefore, once the Union was able to harness that power of industrial and human resources, it was able to take advantage of the Confederacy's weakness. The Confederacy, although still having many men under arms, yet surrendered in large part because it was simply exhausted by the naval blockade and lack of logistics to support their army. But as I said, the adversary we face today is not after our logistics. They know that we have an immense logistical capability and can project it worldwide almost immediately anywhere we want with tremendous accuracy and resiliency to take care of and supply our armed forces. They know they cannot defeat us militarily. Their goal is simply to exhaust our will to fight. Their biggest tool for that is the exploitation of information. They utilize these high visibility sensational attacks that grab attention to portray images of utter chaos and confusion. They'll set off a roadside bomb here, blow up a mosque there, incite violence, hate through their propagandist websites, all setting the conditions to exploit that information to their advantage. They know they don't have to win, they just have to survive until we go away. Now, we in the U.S. Army, we train to execute decisive operations. That's what we've done my entire military career, and not fight strategies of exhaustion. We'll show up on the battlefield and we bring our tanks, our Bradley fighting vehicles, our ground infantry, our air forces, our naval forces, and we're ready to face an enemy and take them on and deal with them in a decisive manner and basically kick their butt. And we can do that anywhere in the world at any time that we want. We have a formidable military force here in the United States of America. And that's how we have traditionally trained, and that's how we are best prepared to execute. Quick, professionally, and competently. But if the enemy won't mass, if the enemy won't identify themselves, and if there is no definitive chain of command, we can't fight them that way. So in this case, the enemy has chosen a strategy, and we must change to address it. So what do we need to change? How can we address these challenges? I'll tell you three things that we need to do to adapt here on the battlefield of the 21st century. And the first one is we have to develop adaptive leaders. The second is we need to address and leverage strategic communications. And finally, we need to be able to operate in a joint interagency, international and multinational type environment. So what does adaptive leadership mean, and why is it so important? Well, first of all, we have to develop leaders so that they're better prepared to adjust to the changing nature of this battlefield, the enemy and warfare. This will give them the ability to also fight the big war if ever required, but also to deal with the threats that we're currently facing today in the 21st century. We must develop leaders that are adaptive. We want our leaders to be able to think on their feet, analyze information quickly, and make critical decisions. That kind of thinking on the 21st battlefield requires a certain set of traits. And among those traits are things like cultural fluency, situational awareness, communication skills, and critical reasoning skills. When we talk about cultural understanding, our soldiers that are serving today, our soldiers, airmen, Marines, and sailors that are out there that you see in Iraq and Afghanistan that are on the line are truly ambassadors for the United States of America. They are the ones who interact with the people there that they protect on a daily basis. And as you take a look at this, I'll share an example. As we were conducting the ground operations into Baghdad back in 2003, we had a infantry battalion, which is about 1,000 young men and women combat arms type group moving up towards the city of Najaf. And in there's a holy shrine that exists there. And there's a very particular sheikh called Sistani, the #1 of all of Iraq for the Shia. Well, this battalion commander has got orders to move through this location and continue north to Baghdad. And he knows that's what he has to do. He's got the combat, the firepower, and the capability to do that. But he also realizes if he could get Sistani, the key religious figure there in Iraq, to issue a decree, a fatwa, saying, don't fight the Americans, let them move through, then he could take his forces safely through there without inflicting any casualties on anybody and being able to still accomplish his mission. So he takes an element and he moves towards the shrine. And en route there, he confronts an angry mob of Iraqis. They're armed, and they're not about to let him move forward. Now, he had the combat power to have eliminated them at that point if he had thought they had been a threat to his forces. But instead he realized, because he was an adaptive leader, because he was culturally attuned and reading the situation, that all they were trying to do was protect the shrine in the holy city of Najaf. That they, in fact, didn't want a confrontation with him, but they would if they had to protect their shrine. So what did this battalion commander do, this lieutenant colonel in the United States Army, Chris Hughes? He told his soldiers to put their weapons down towards the ground, to not be in a provocative manner. He, in fact, eliminated their ability to immediately protect themselves. But he saw, based on his assessment of the situation, that that was the way to go. But that wasn't quite enough. They were still angry and still wanted him to leave. Yet all he wanted to do was to talk to somebody from the representative of Sistani to get this fatwa issued. So then he told his men, take a knee. And they all took a knee. And then some of the Iraqis took a knee. And then they realized something different was going on. And meanwhile, he's got his interpreter continuing the talk and the dialogue with the Iraqis here in this group. And they're becoming calmer now at this point. And then he did something that you can't find in a textbook. He told his soldiers to smile. Smile at the Iraqis. Let them know we bring no harm, but in fact we are here to dialogue and engage with them in a non-provocative manner. And that's exactly what Chris did. And in doing so, he was able to eventually get a representative from Sistani to talk to him, and a fatwa got issued. And he was literally able to move these 1,000 men and women, these combat forces, through that area safely without any engagements or incidents with the Iraqi people. And he moved on to Baghdad. What could have been a military operation was one that was changed overnight because of his cultural understanding of what the situation that was going on. Chris Hughes understood what was happening. He was an adaptive leader, and he read the situation. He was situationally aware of what was happening. And that's exactly what our soldiers and our leaders today and our military in this 21st century warfare must understand. That we as soldiers, in fact, have to do some pretty extraordinary things. We ask those young men and women that are down in those towns and villages every day in Iraq and Afghanistan to make those same identical kind of critical decisions. We ask them to patrol streets, to take in data from countless sensors and indicators, and in a split second to decide whether to engage or not to engage, or whether to strike up a conversation or make an arrest. And it's these young men and women in uniform with their junior leaders that have to become culturally aware and situationally astute to what's going on to make these key critical decisions. It's interesting. I once heard a cop say, juries deliberate for days and weeks about actions that cops have to make in a split second. And that's the same thing you're finding today with the men and women who are operating in Iraq and Afghanistan. They are literally having seconds to make critical decisions about how to continue conducting whatever operations they've been asked to do out there in those countries. We've also asked them to become active communicators. We want them to get out and engage with and be a part of the population. That's part of this counterinsurgency thing you hear about. That's exactly what it's about. It's about being with and protecting the people. Because what we have found, that when you have contact with the people, that leads to greater confidence between us and them. And through that confidence, you start finding cooperation. And then the starfish that's hanging out in that village is no longer going to be able to survive. Because that cooperation that starts occurring between the adaptive leaders and their soldiers, who are culturally attuned and situationally aware, and are now actively communicating with and dealing with the people, have established a rapport which led to close cooperation to eliminate that threat, which they themselves, most Iraqis, don't want to have around. And the other thing we have to instill in them is critical reasoning skills. You know, we constantly talk about the importance at the college up at Fort Leavenworth. We're not interested in teaching our soldiers and our leaders what to think. We want to teach them how to think. There is no way in this 21st century battlefield of today we can ever possibly prepare them for every single contingency they're about to face. It's absolutely impossible. But what we can do, and what we must do, is teach them how to think, not what to think. And by teaching them how to think, by helping them become critical reasoners, we in fact are asking them to challenge assumptions and to ask why. To take every premise that you've been told before and to ask whether it is in fact correct. We have our officers read books like Fiasco and Cobra 2. We ask them to come into class and have discussions about them and to share their thoughts and their feelings and their reactions to having read something that perhaps is not something that they necessarily agree with, but to have an honest, open dialogue with it, because that's what it takes to become a critical reasoner, is challenging assumptions and always asking the question why. It doesn't mean when given orders that they won't respond instantaneously and do as told, but it does say when you're in an educational environment like we have at Fort Leavenworth, that's absolutely imperative to the development of our leaders for the 21st century. We need leaders who are forward-thinking, who think through the second and third order effects of everything they're about to do, and can rapidly exercise effective decision-making. Along with adaptive leaders, we need an army that is focused on the information battlefield, or what we call strategic communications. Let me tell you, the enemy is sure focused on it. You know, I was asked once, you know, as the spokesperson for the multinational force in Iraq, who did you look at or study a little as you went into that role? Well, once I got into the role, I realized I could have gone back and looked at somebody like Schwarzkopf and what he did in the Gulf War, but I didn't do that. I could have looked at some other famous people who have gone out and talked a lot. Instead, what I did was looked at Zawahiri. Because what I found was Zawahiri understands the powerful medium that this information domain gives to the adversary, it gives to them. He gets it. He sent a letter in 2005 to Zarqawi. And in that letter to Zarqawi, he talks to him and he says, I say to you that we are in a battle, and more than half of this battle is taking place in the battlefield of the media. And that we are in a media battle race for the hearts and minds of the people. He gets it. He understood that. That was 2005 when he wrote that letter to Zarqawi, telling him what he needed to be aware of. Non-state actors are influencing public opinion. Therefore, it becomes paramount to deny them that popular acceptance and to use and prevent them from having the ability to find sanctuary in other places of the world. Eroding their support, then, is one of our primary purposes of what we should be using strategic communications for in the 21st century. The Defense Department recognized that last year in what's called the Quadrennial Defense Review, QDR as they call it. It said victory in the long war ultimately depends on strategic communication by the United States and its international partners. Victory in the long war ultimately depends on strategic communications. I mean, it's understood and accepted. Now it needs to be put into practice here in the 21st century. There are several things we did when I took over as spokesman for the multinational force in Iraq. We realized that we needed to reach out and have a discussion and dialogue with the people within the Middle East, that it wasn't just about talking to the American public or those in the Western world. And so we would leave Iraq for a 48-hour period and fly down to Doha and Dubai and engage with the Arabic media. And we'd do that for about 2.5 days, somewhere doing between 18 different media type engagements in those 2.5 days. The first time I walked into Al Jazeera Arabic, I remember one of the young ladies looking at me and saying, "General, you're welcome here, but just don't invade us." And it became very apparent to me that she didn't understand at all why we were there. We were there to communicate and have a dialogue with the people from the Arabic world using one of the primary mediums of communication there, which is Al Jazeera Arabic. The director that I eventually linked up with inside there looked at me and he said, "You're the first American general we've ever had in here." The first American general we ever had in here. And this is the year 2006. The battlefield of the 21st century has changed, and strategic communications are critical. And to be effective in that medium, you have to engage in it and have a dialogue in it. And you have to provide the information to the people so that they can make an informed decision. You see, we have a responsibility, we in the military do, to communicate effectively both internally and externally. We know that Al-Qaeda's goal is to erode the will of the people, to carry on their strategy of exhaustion. We also know that Al-Qaeda wants to drum up support in the Sunni Arab community from the Philippines all the way to Africa, and sow chaos and discord among competing factions. We can either allow them to continue to exploit the information domain, or we can get engaged and help set the record straight and take an aggressive stance to ensure that an accurate picture of events is presented. Finally, we need to develop organizations and people who are comfortable operating in a joint, interagency, intergovernmental, and multinational environment. Gone are the days when we go it completely alone. It used to be we fought as an army, then we learned to fight as a joint force. Today and forever hence, we will always fight as a U.S. government. The U.S. military will never lose a battle in Iraq or Afghanistan, but we alone will never win the peace. The mission is far too complex. The populations we interact with are far too diverse. We need experts in nation building, implementation of community services. In the current fight and in future fights, we know that we're going to need forces that can help sustain and maintain a lasting peace. We need engineers, civil affairs personnel, public affairs officers, civil police advisors, to name many, many types of folks that have to come and be a part of the overall U.S. government effort. Currently, the Army is performing a lot of these civil functions in Iraq and Afghanistan. And oh yes, let's not forget, we're still actively engaged in Bosnia and Kosovo too. We are by no means the experts in many of these fields. Therefore, we need to be prepared to bring the experts into our areas of operation. We need to know how to use them, how to protect them, and how to resource them. Experts from the other government agencies like the Department of State, Department of Treasury, Agriculture, Commerce. We need experts from USAID. The better we can interact, cooperate, and incorporate these non-military entities into our plans and operations, the more successful we as a U.S. government will be. Many of the students in this room may not become soldiers and serve in our armed forces, but they may one day work for many of these organizations. You may see and work with those in uniform in later years. We also need to be prepared to operate in the multinational environment. The complexities of what that brings are beyond what our comprehension was just 5 years ago. Our allies have unique cultures, cultures that truly we have got to understand better. They operate under different national policy directives. When you start looking at 30 different nations with 30 different political objectives, with 30 different directives to their armed forces within Iraq and Afghanistan, it can be challenging to say the least. But it's something we're learning to adapt to in the 21st century warfare, and we're in fact working through together. We're doing that because it is absolutely the right thing to do. It should be a multinational operation. Information has become the mini ball or the machine gun of the 21st century. Al-Qaeda and our adversaries are leveraging the use, the exploitation, and the distribution of information in order to recruit members to their organizations and to both slander what the United States is doing, and also to break the will of those who would support the current ongoing efforts. In order to prevent this exploitation, we must develop adaptive leaders who know how to when to use force and then also know how when to use a lending hand. Leaders who can process information quickly and make sound tactical decisions that have solid, positive, strategic implications. We need to engage the media when required to correct errors, report the facts, and inform the American people. And finally, we need to build relationships with other services, agencies, and other nations. If we do all these things, we can adapt to the changing face of warfare in the 21st century and meet the challenges that will arise in the immediate future. Your Army and your soldiers and civilians at Fort Leavenworth are working very hard to adapt to these challenges of today and to prepare for the challenges of tomorrow. Thank you very much. And with that, I'll be glad to take any questions anybody might have. There's a question back in the back.
General, my name is Jeff Pasa. I grew up not too far from here with Captain Scott Spiker and have become acquainted with a murdered POW's parents about 6 blocks from where Scott and I grew up by the name of Donald Walters. And that's kind of led me to some parents of a currently captured soldier, Matt Maupin. And I believe with everything you're saying here tonight, except when it comes to the currently captured personnel that are best known in the press and from the military public affairs as missing, even though the actual casualty status is missing captured. It seems in our past wars the policy for our soldiers that are about to be in imminent danger of capture are 1, your SEER training, 2, your rights as a Geneva Convention's prisoner of war, which your country has always called you, and number 3, a silent policy of, I guess, the last bullet in your chamber. And now we just have 2 without calling our captured soldiers what the rest of the world calls them, and the international bodies like the International Red Cross call them. They are called prisoners of war. And I'm just wondering if you'll please speak to the room as to what the actual legal status, and has Matt Maupin attained the legal status of prisoner of war?
Sergeant Matt Maupin is in fact listed as missing currently in Iraq. And I think you're probably aware that, if you're familiar with the family, that there have been over 100 locations that I am aware of as of about 8 months ago when I left Iraq. I left in June time frame, that had already been conducted in terms of trying to locate where his remains may be. Well, if you want me to come back to you, I'll be glad to get you the official duty status that the United States. Again, I have not been in Iraq since June, and so I have not been tracking. Again, no. Listen, let me just say one thing about prisoners of war, and I say this very passionately because we, as members of the armed forces, take this to the hilt, and that is, we don't leave a comrade behind. We never have, and we're never going to start now. And Sergeant Maupin is part of us. He is a brother in arms. And we will never forget him, and we will continue looking until we find and understand the status of Sergeant Maupin, just as we will every American military member that is missing over there today. And so you may have different things you want to call it, but we are not going to forget that. Okay. Well, I can tell I dealt with these situations when I was over there. And
thank you for your service. We
have American soldiers that died looking for those who are missing, who gave their lives, because it's that important to all of us in uniform. Because we all know that if anything ever happens to us in a combat zone, there will be no stone unturned, no resource not committed. I mean, I was there when we were literally going to the people who control satellites in the sky and having things turned and adjusted and modified so that we can make sure the full force of the United States resources were being put and committed to helping us locate our missing soldiers in action. All right. Okay. Okay. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, first of all.
Yes, sir.
Presentation, very thought-provoking. And the right answer to the issue that was just raised. We don't leave people behind. We care about our soldiers. And anybody that served in battle in the wars that I've been to, that's the doctrine, what you just said. And we put our lives on the line to make it happen. My question and my observation first, I was in the occupation forces in Germany after the Great War. And in the U.S. constabulary, we, until 1948, Germans weren't authorized to have weapons. They had none. We took them all away from them at the end of the war. We didn't do that in Iraq. But one of the things we did was put a German policeman in each vehicle with his nightstick. And he rode around with the patrol. And if we had an issue with the German civilians, he handled it. If we had an issue with the military guy handled it. But they formed a joint partnership and understanding. Somebody said, oh, the soldier driving a Jeep won't understand German. Well, within a matter of days, they were giving the German guy some chocolate and a few other things and visiting his home and getting to know his family, and great relationships, some of which exist today. But in Iraq, we never got around to doing that. And I don't understand why right from the beginning, when our vehicles were rolling out of the compounds, and even today, why don't we put one or two Iraqis on top of each one of our vehicles with their headgear or waving in the breeze? And good Muslims don't shoot other good Muslims. And they don't put IEDs in the road where they go. And had we put Muslim drivers in the big rigs going down the road instead of bringing in foreign nationals, when there's a big unemployment rate in Iraq, we would be way down the road of cementing the relationships that you're talking about. Why didn't we do that?
Sorry, I can't speak with great clarity back in 2003, 2004 time frame what they exactly were or were not doing on the ground. I can tell you from the time period I just came out of Iraq in, we in fact work very closely with our Iraqi counterparts. They are closely embedded with us. As you know, we now not only have transition teams embedded with our Iraqi counterparts, but we're conducting what we call coalition combined operations on a routine basis now. So anytime we go in to conduct a military operation, what you will normally find is that the U.S. forces are providing the outer cordon and security to the greatest extent whenever we can, and then letting the Iraqi security forces, the ISF, in fact, conduct the military action in there with the people, with the transition team members embedded with them, providing continual guidance, direction, professionalism for the Iraqi forces.
Iraqis are still not driving the big rigs. Third country nationals are.
Right. Again, I'd have to go back. You know, we have a lot of things that are contracted out over there. I can tell you that the policy from the U.S. government side, U.S. military side, is when we contract something out, the contractor decides who, in fact, does or doesn't drive something. That's a civilian vehicle, not us.
General, I have a question back here, and if I could remind our audience, please confine your remarks to a question directed at General Caldwell. Thank you very much.
Yes, I was wondering if you would compare and contrast the use of private contractors in the wars past and the present, and also address the necessity of utilizing these and whether they are following the mission of our armed services.
The private contracting today in Iraq, there's probably just a few more private contractors in Iraq than there are uniformed military members. The numbers I've heard is about 180,000 contractors exist somewhere in Iraq, and there's about 160,000 military members. So they're absolutely paramount to what we do today in operations both in Iraq and Afghanistan. They provide tremendous amounts of logistical support and administrative support for us, freeing up the military members to conduct military operations, and then using the contractors to the greatest extent possible to provide the logistics and the administration. And in fact, we could not conduct operations today in Iraq, we the military, without our contract support that we have there assisting us and helping us in that regard. Conscious decision made a couple years ago that we would use them because they're great patriots. They're serving their country over there as part of the overall U.S. government effort. They're there in civilian clothes. Most of them you find working on our military bases, doing what they do best. They're everything from helping fix helicopters to everything else you can imagine. That then frees up the military combat forces to be able to go out and conduct military operations.
Thank you very much for that nice presentation, General. In the early part of your presentation, you quoted Sun Tzu of The Art of War. And I don't know if this is part of your bailiwick, but my first question is, how many or what percentage of the U.S. military, the Army, speaks Mandarin Chinese, and what is your view of the People's Republic of China in terms of the nature of warfare in the 21st century?
I could get you the exact number, and it's very easily. It's not a classified number by any means, and we'd be glad to get it for you. I, in fact, have oversight for our Defense Language Institute out of Monterey, California, where we, in fact, train over 67 different languages there with a throughput of about 7,000 to 8,000 students a year. Obviously, some, like our Arabic program, is about a year-plus program of language training because of the complexity, as is Mandarin Chinese. But, in fact, it's one of our top languages that we focus on. We do find it critical to the future. It is very important. My deputy commandant, the one-star general that works for me out of Fort Leavenworth, that helps run the school for me day to day, the college, is fluent in Mandarin Chinese, has lived there for 4 years during his military career. In fact, I just sent him there 2 months ago as part of an observation party to look at some ongoing Chinese training that we are offered the opportunity to do that. And we, in fact, continue to work and try to establish on an educational basis exchange programs between us and the Chinese military, because we think that kind of dialogue and exchange is important and to the future. Anytime, I think most people would probably agree in this room, when you can have a dialogue between two parties, that's healthy, because that's a start point from which to discuss and work out any differences, remove any misperceptions, and help establish relationships that can prove very beneficial in the future. And so we do want and we do support, from an educational standpoint, the exchange programs we have, and want to continue to see them not only continue but perhaps to even grow. China is as I stated in there, I said there's non-state actors and there's state actors, nation-state actors. And obviously China is a very, when you just look at the sheer size of that nation, is a very powerful nation in the world today and continues to grow. And so it's somebody that we do want to continue to have a dialogue with and stay engaged with, so that we don't develop misperceptions about the intentions of each other, but rather have a greater understanding. Yes, sir.
Yes, General. I'm concerned about the op tempo of the Army right now, and these just coming back and then going back. And is there any end in sight?
All right, I have the same concern. I share it 100% with you. Our Army is stretched to the point right now that we are very stressed. We will be unable to sustain and continue doing what we're doing today in out years unless we have some relief. We either have to reduce our force levels in Iraq, or we have to increase the force levels of the force structure of the United States Army, your Army. We have to do one of the two if we want to continue doing like we are today. I think the decisions made, we are going to start bringing down the levels of forces in Iraq. We've recently heard that by about 25% over the next 8 or 10 months. That will greatly help reduce the stress levels and get us back more to where we have more downtime between rotations and to the combat theater. But it is challenging right now. We are even at the college, to show you the degree to which I have a personal concern about it. We did little things like, on the 1st of December, we're changing the start time for our college classes. 75% of my Army officers are all combat veterans. It will be 88% in my next class, and I predict by next summer it will be up to about 92%. I mean, because everybody is with slowly having a rotation through the combat theater. And so we're doing simple things like, instead of starting classes at 8 o'clock in the morning, we're starting them at 8:30, so that the men and women who are serving in uniform can have time to do physical training in the morning and spend time with their families and walk their kids to school or put their kids on a school bus. Something for 15 months they were not able to do while deployed into Iraq and Afghanistan. We're working hard to make sure that when there's a birthday, when there's a special event in their families, that the instructors understand they will give the students that time off if asked, so that they can be home with their families. Because there is no reason, when they're not in the combat zone, to have to miss key critical family events that people have missed so much over the last couple of years, especially those who are in second, third, or fourth deployments. My staff I had with me were both 3-time deployers. Out of the last 6 years, they had spent 3 years in Iraq. And so I very much appreciate and understood that, just dealing with them on a daily basis and listening to them interface and talk with their loved ones back in the United States. It's tough on those serving in uniform. But you know what I continue to see? They do it, and they do it willingly. It's just incredible to me. Those young men and women serving in uniform, I mean, you could not be more proud of talking to them despite the number of rotations they've had. I worry more for their families back here in the United States than I do about those serving in uniform. Those of us who serve, we're volunteers, and we understand, and we count on our leadership to figure ways to reduce our stress. But those who are married to us do it for the love of us. And I mean, how do you get that from people? You know, it's just, I'm amazed at the strength of America every day when I talk to the families of those military members who have served or are serving today over in Iraq and Afghanistan. I'm sorry.
The war. I said I wondered about the morale of the troops in regard to how the media here handles the war.
The question I'm asked a lot, and I normally don't answer it. No. What I would tell you, what's actually very surprising, they may feel a disappointment that people don't know the good things that are happening. It's not that they're opposed to what's being said as much as a disappointment that not everything is being seen. Every day, young men and women over there in uniform, you know, they wake up, they put on their boots, they blouse them up, they strap on that body armor, they pick their weapon up, and they move out on point for our nation. And they're doing what our nation has asked them to do. And they want to do good. They believe that they can make a difference in the Iraqis' lives or the Afghanis' lives in the area that they're operating. They really do. I mean, I was blessed in that for 13 months I traveled around Iraq every single week. I had that unique ability to visit all the military organizations continuously. And every time I did, the young men and women would ask me, just, General, do me a favor and share my story. Share the story of what we're doing. Tell the American public the things that are also going on over here that they don't hear about. And so I've taken on this mantra of tell the story of the American soldier. Share the story of what each man and woman over there is doing who is serving in uniform. They do it best themselves. I can't ever do the justice to some young 18-year-old kid who says, I'm here serving and here's what I've seen and here's what I've experienced and here's what I've done. And he and she can do it far so much better than I can. But I would just say they ask to have their story told. They want people to hear what's going on. And I personally have taken on a feeling that we have got to better strategically communicate with the American public and figure out how we can share these stories and tell people what's happening. I mean, I asked the other day, I threw up a picture of a young lieutenant, a Navy lieutenant on a screen. And I was in a military group, and I said, how many of y'all can identify who this is? And I had 2 hands out of a group of about 60 that were in this room. It was the latest Medal of Honor recipient, a Navy Lieutenant SEAL, who had received the Medal of Honor. I often talk about Sergeant First Class Paul Smith. Sergeant First Class Paul Smith is an American sergeant. He's an American soldier. He's an Army soldier. He gave his life in Iraq. He received the Medal of Honor for his actions. He is the one Army Medal of Honor recipient we have in the United States Army from the combat theater over there. And yet a lot of people have never heard of him. And yet when he died, he did it in an incredibly selfless manner. And a letter that he had written home to his mom and dad that was opened after his death. In there he talks to his parents about the fact that I'm willing to give my life to do whatever it takes from myself to ensure that my men all come home alive. And that's exactly what he did. And when his group of about 100 American soldiers were attacked, he formed them up and got them in an organization as best he could against this onslaught that was coming against them, continued to help evacuate people. He took control and started directing actions of everybody. And they had a couple of these armored type vehicles which were quickly disabled by these what are called RPGs, rocket propelled grenades. And yet, with total disregard for his own life, he climbs into the hatch of one of these because this heavy machine gun is still working. And he starts firing. He starts yelling to people to bring him ammunition. And there's this young kid, this young private first class, who tells the story better than anybody else about as he's bringing the 7th can of ammunition over to the armored personnel carrier that's been disabled. And you've got this sergeant in there who's still firing away, who's directed the evacuation of the wounded that have been wounded, who's organized this organization into some coherent defense to protect themselves. He's killed somewhere between 50 insurgents at this point, as the record accounts, due to his personal actions on this machine gun. The young PFC says, the gun went silent, and I assumed he was just out of ammo again, so I ran harder to get to the location. And as I placed a can of ammo up there on top, I saw him slumped over. And I realized he had given his life so that all of us could live. And I mean, it's those incredible stories that I think need to be told more and need to be shared with people. We have such incredibly selfless servants that want to do nothing but serve others, that do it willingly. You know, they don't want to die, but they're willing to if they have to for those that are in their group. And they do it every day of the week, and it's just amazing to me. So,
we have another question here.
General, you have outlined a very comprehensive approach to training for those engaged in the combat, and it appears as though it would engender fewer casualties and injuries than our former approach. And I think it restores a great deal of confidence in what our military is doing to hear you talk about the new training. My question is this: inasmuch as we have as many non-military personnel in security roles, Is the Department of Defense or the State Department going to adapt some of the same kind of training for others who are in the military combat zone?
I can tell you that, in fact, that's being looked at real hard, and there are a lot of tough decisions associated with that because they are civilians. They're not uniformed people. So to what degree can we require or mandate that they have to go through certain aspects of training? I do know we are making it much more readily available for those who opt to take the training, but I'd have to really get back to you that I have not tracked closely where we are in that whole debate. Then there's the whole separate side, which isn't obviously the Department of Defense, but is the rest of the U.S. government and how they handle and work with their contractors that I'm not really sure about at all, what they're doing in that respect. I do know simple things like provincial reconstruction teams, which are one of the key aspects to energizing and getting the local governance and municipalities of different areas in Iraq and Afghanistan up and running again. They go through a week of training through the State Department before they're deployed over there to serve in these provincial reconstruction teams. We're working very diligently now, asking them when they finish that week of training, could they give them to us, the Department of Defense? And what we'd like to do is take in all these people from USAID, Treasury, Commerce, wherever they're from in the U.S. government, bring them under military control for a couple weeks and embed them into our training here in the United States with units that are preparing to deploy over and have them go through the training with us. And then obviously when they're done, they can go back to the Department of State or wherever it is and continue on with their plan of deploying them over. But we have gone forth, we've made the proposal, and we're going to work diligently to try to make sure they know they have that opportunity available to them. And it would benefit us too. There'd be nothing better than a bunch of military men and women in uniform going through training, and they turn around, here's this civilian from the Department of Agriculture, and he's saying, well, what do I do now? And in different situations. But it'll happen in the combat zone. We have a choice. We can practice it here and work it together here in peacetime before we deploy or back in the safety of the United States, or we can meet them for the first time in Iraq or Afghanistan, which is unfortunately normally what happens right now. But we'd like to see that changed, and we're working to try to change that.
Thank you. One more question? We have one in the back. Thank you.
Thank you for your remarks this evening, General. I'm wondering, over the years, we have seen a lot of attention given to the various special forces of the different branches of the armed services. For instance, the Rangers, the SEALs for the Navy. And those individuals receive intensive training, goes on over a long time. They're quite an investment. Do you see more emphasis on use of special forces or less in this modern aspect of warfare?
I see more. And we, in fact, are going to, right now, train and equip and stand up 5 additional battalions of special forces. That's how critical we see them to the future of what we're doing out there. They are a key integral piece. But I will also tell you, for the first time in my military career of 31 years, we are working more closely and in daily contact with the special forces, those who, they have what they call the black side and the white side, the kind that are out in the open. But those kind of special forces folks, the ones that are normally out doing the interface with the Iraqi population, Afghani population, a closer interface and work relationship than we've ever seen before. And it's extremely positive. We are leveraging each other, getting tremendous synergy out of it, and finding that we don't have to create all new kinds of formations. That, in fact, when the Special Forces operating area needs some additional assistance and help, they can call on what we call the general purpose forces, the divisions, the brigades, the regular Army forces there, or whatever element it is, and they can help and assist. What's amazing to me is to have watched us over these last couple of years. When I got to Iraq and I took over this little organization I had, my 2 deputies were a Navy admiral and an Air Force general. Those were my 2 deputies. They weren't Army folks. And then when you got down within my organization, it was a mixture of all services. They were not, as I had initially probably thought, mostly Army. I, in fact, probably had more Navy than anything else working for me as we helped work things like governance, economic development, provincial reconstruction teams, and some other things we help provide oversight for. But I had them from all the services. They're more joint than I've ever seen again in my 31 years of service. You know, we're starting to leverage and use. If you go out to the Army units, every time I visit an Army unit, you always found one Navy person someplace around those Army formations, and that was an electronics warfare officer. They understood and knew better the electric warfare, you know, medium, this whole thing of how IEDs are set off and everything else better than anybody else. They knew how to work jammers and better than the Army people do. We were working diligently to correct that within our own force structure in the Army, but the Navy's great at it. And so we were always grabbing them saying, come on, Bubby, you can be part of our team, you know. And we've really, the Navy has been great about providing those assets all the way down into the combat formations at the lowest level throughout Iraq and Afghanistan to help assist us. So it's been a real joint effort, and things like the Special Forces, fully integrated, working as one team, one military element over there instead of separate, as I've seen mostly in my career. We're now really embedding and using each other's talents.
I want to thank you, General Caldwell, for your time, for your candor, and for your service. Thank you for coming to the Dole Institute, and thank you all for coming tonight.
Wait, if I could, whoa, don't move. I don't get to do this often. Tell a bunch of civilians don't move, but it's hard. You actually listen. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I do have one thing I'd like to leave here for the Dole Institute. On behalf of the U.S. Army, and especially the Combined Arms Center at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, we'd like to leave a gift here for you all. I think most of you all know that in 1866, the U.S. Congress made the decision that we're going to stand up and raise 5 regiments of African-American organizations, or there were 6, 4 infantry and then 2 cavalry, and they were the 9th and the 10th Cavalry Regiments. The 10th Cavalry Regiment was formed and garrisoned at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, just up the road here from you. It was the formation of one of our first all-black units in the United States Army. From that, and because of the heritage that we associate ourselves with the 10th Regiment, the 10th Cavalry Regiment, in 1992, General Colin Powell and Senator Bob Dole together co-sponsored and raised the funds and erected a monument there in recognition of the cavalry regiments, the 9th and the 10th Cavalry Regiments. And when they did that, there was a sculptor that was hired, and he produced for Colin Powell, General Powell, 100 statues. And over the years, General Powell has controlled and delegated where these 100 statues could be given to, and there's about 6 left. Oh. And now there's 5. And
I think it's here.
As I said, what I'd like to do is, and if you all haven't seen this, it's a this is an exact replica of the statue that currently is at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. If you have not come to visit, you are cordially invited. We'd love to have you come visit our installation, and you will see a live, full size statue of this 10th Cavalry Regimental soldier, an American soldier, an African American. And there's only 100 of these. This is the 96th one right here. Signed by the sculptor on it, and we'd like to present this to the Dole Institute.
Wow, thank you. That's wonderful. Thank you, General. I really appreciate your coming.
Thank you very much.
Oh, good. Good. Fantastic.